Hi everyone, my name is Alison Lytle. You're here today with Art Express, where you get to make wonderful creations from your imagination, but also inspired by museum work. I'm really excited today. We're going to be taking a quick look at some quilts that are in the Gather Together Quilts of Niagara exhibit here at the Castellani Art Museum and see whether they can inspire us to create an original piece of artwork. Certainly has inspired me. Have you ever curled up in a quilt at your house? Is there someone who creates a quilt? They're made by putting several pieces of fabric together, sewing them sometimes by hand or on machine into geometric shapes. Sometimes there's things called crazy quilts with lots of shapes and colors all over the place, and between the top of the quilt and the bottom of the quilt is a beautiful felt or fiber or natural warm piece of filling. And that's what creates the heat and keeps you warm. But what really makes you feel good is the pattern on the top of the quilt, because sometimes they tell stories. Right? Sometimes they're simple geometric patterns, but sometimes they actually tell stories. So we're going to take a look at some of those quilts really quickly, and then we're going to create our own. But we're not going to do it out of fabric. We're actually going to create it out of scraps of painted paper that we've used for projects in the past. Let me show you what we're going to create. So this is an example of what you can create. And these are lots of different squares that have been painted and cut out and placed into a geometric pattern on this sheet of paper. And you're going to make your own. So let's go. Let's take a look. Okay, we're ready to start. But first we need to take a look at the supplies that we need for this project. So pretty simple. In fact, I'm sure you probably have some of these around your house. A watercolor set, some brushes, a container for some water. You certainly need some scissors, all right? Probably you want the round tip scissors. Some Elmer's glue sticks, a pencil, and then if you want to experiment a little bit more and don't want to use your regular watercolor set, there's also something called concentrated liquid watercolors, and those are a lot of fun to use too. In addition to this, you're going to need some paper. Now, I think it's really fun to use watercolor paper for this project, but you can use a lot of different types of paper, even paper that you've already painted on before that's still lying around your house. So the other thing you're going to need to do this project is a lot of cardboard. Well, a lot of cardboard, at least a big sheet of cardboard. I use cardboard all the time, and because it's a reusable supply. And you're going to end up cutting up some of these pieces of cardboard into the shapes and sizes for your pattern, for your quilt. Some of them may be circles, and some of them may be squares. So make sure you have lots of cardboard around and your pencil. I just finished up a big painting project. In fact, my hands are still all covered in paint. And I haven't cleaned my brushes yet. One of the things that I like to do, and look at how messy these are, is always clean my brushes first on a piece of paper, because I like to use that piece of paper for a collage or an artwork that I can cut up sometime in the future. So I'm actually going to clean some of my brushes on here first. You see all this paint that otherwise would have gone down the drain? Well, I am going to put it on the piece of paper. And I'm going to swish my brush around in different ways, and I'm not really concerned with exactly what this looks like. I'm not going to paint a house or a tree or anything like that. I'm really just going to clean my brush off. And believe it or not, then after I put it in the water, this this piece of paper might actually be used for our next project. So look at all these brushes. I'm a really messy painter, by the way. Did you see this? If your art teacher might get angry with you if you leave your watercolor set that way. So here we go, a few more brushes. Look at that yellow. I like that yellow. Clean it all off, and I'm going to use this in the future, cut it up into little pieces, and it's going to become artwork. So in my studio, I have mounds and mounds of paper that have all been created from cleaning my brushes. And I'm going to choose from some of that paper today in order to create our collage quilt. Here's the first one. As you can tell, I was using a really big brush. But there's also other pieces of paper from other projects and other cleaning of brushes that I'm going to show you right now. Look at this one. This one actually, well, I got a little meditative when I was cleaning my brush on this, and I decided I was going to make lots of purple marks on the paper. On this one, I created stripes. This one was just a big wash of purple. This one was a big wash of blue. And you can see how they're all different. They don't really look like anything right now, but when we cut them up, they're going to look really cool. And on this blue piece of paper, look what I did here. I decided to get a little carried away, and I put little blue X's all over the top of it. This is all from cleaning my brushes. Look at this. Here's a piece of paper that I turned a jar upside down and put it on the paper, and the jar actually had paint in it. So this is what it looked like on the paper when I cleaned that jar out. Maybe we can use that. Then there's all these other little fun bits and pieces of paper from cleaning and my brush and experimenting that I can use for any part of my collage quilt, right? I just have to make the decision which one I'm going to use today. And there's another one, just like the first one. Now there's one last thing that you may or may want not, there's one last thing that you may or may not want to use when you create your collage quilt, and that's a piece of just very simple black construction paper. So it's an option. Let's get started. Okay, so the next part of the project is deciding what kind of collage quilt we want to make. Is it going to represent something in particular that's important to us, or do you just want to try your hands at doing a geometric quilt with just some simple shapes and some beautiful paper that you've created? So today I'm going to do a very simple geometric collage quilt with the simple shapes and the paper. And I've cut out a bunch of different squares and circles from my cardboard stash, and I have to decide what I'm going to use. Am I going to use circles, or am I going to use squares? Am I going to use stars? I could use triangles. I could use squiggles. But I think I'm going to keep my quilt today rather simple. So I'm going to pick 4 sizes of squares. And those are the only things that I'm going to use in creating my collage quilt. And there's going to be a big one, and another one that's just a little bit smaller, okay? And then, let's see, this one, it's a little bit smaller than that, right? And this one, a little smaller. You see how each one starts to get smaller as they go towards the center? Now, when you cut out your shapes, you have to be very careful with your scissors. You may want to have mom and dad help you, okay? But you don't have to do a square if you don't want to. You could do a star, and you could draw the star on that, and then cut that out, all right? You could decide to use circles, right? And you could use different sizes of circles, just like I'm going to do different squares, right? There's no rule with this. It's all about what you think would be a really neat and creative idea, all right? So I'm gonna use the squares. So let's get my space nice and clean. Now this looks dirty, but it's actually all dry. You wanna make sure that your space is nice and dry, all right? We've got all these wonderful crazy papers that we looked at before, and I'm gonna start making a choice about what square size is gonna work with what kind of paper, okay? Now, there's a friend of mine who really likes this purple squiggly line, so I think that's gonna be what I'm gonna put in my small square. I need 6 of these. All right, so I've picked the papers that I want to use for this project, and I've decided all the different sizes that each one is going to represent. So I've got 4 pieces of cardboard, remember? 1, 2, 3, 4. And the smallest one is going to be represented by this cool piece of paper with purple squiggly colors all over it. And the next size is going to be this purple wash. The next size, I think I'm actually going to use some of the black construction paper. And then this size is going to be this crazy purple or blue and green and yellow sheet of paper. All right. So the first thing I have to do is I have to cut out 6 of these for each piece of paper. So I'm going to get started. Lots of work to do. The easiest thing to do is turn it upside down and then trace. This is like a pattern, right? I'm going to trace around the edges of my piece of cardboard 6 times. That's the first one. Here's the next one. You want to make sure you get it pretty lined up, okay? One of the things that you can do is hold the piece of cardboard with one hand with your fingers on top, and then it won't move around while you trace around the edges, okay? And Mom and Dad, if you're listening in, I would think it would be fun for you to create your own as well. Okay, so I have all 4 pieces that have been drawn 6 times. Now the fun part starts of cutting them out. I'm going to use my bigger scissors, but you may want to use the smaller ones. And I have a recommendation. So I do one long cut along one edge first, and then do the second cut along the second edge. Don't worry if everything doesn't line up perfectly. Remember, when you look at a quilt, sometimes some edges are a little bit off and some of the squares might not be quite square. Okay, there's going to be 6 sheets of paper that are going to be my quilt pieces for the collage from this piece of cardboard. Now I'm going to do my next one. So I've finished cutting my black squares and I've started cutting my largest squares of all. I have 3 of them. I'm going to do the last 2. 1, 2, last 2 cuts, and I'll get 3 more. Okay, there we go. Now I have 6 pieces of these wonderful green pieces of paper, which are going to be the one portion of my quilt. I have 6 pieces of black. I have 6 pieces of the light purpley pink, and I have 6 pieces of these lovely purple squiggles. Now the fun part begins, because we get to decide how exactly we want this quilt to look. Everybody ready? So I'm going to put these aside, and I'm going to move these over here. And I'm going to get my nice big piece of white paper, which is going to be the base of our quilt. So think about this as being a sheet of fabric, okay? And on top of the sheet of fabric are going to be some of our quilt squares. These are the first 2. These are the next 2. And and these are the last two. You see how there's a really nice space in between all of them, right? That gives it a really nice geometric feeling. Isn't that pretty? And there's a nice border along the edge here. And right now, I'm just playing around with kind of a puzzle piece, right? How do I want this quilt to look? And you gotta remember, you see you might not be able to see it, but there's a little line of pencil here. I always wanna make sure the pencil with the cardboard is facing down. Okay, so if I've decided that that's what I'm gonna do, then what do I need to do first as far as gluing is concerned? What do you think? Do you have any idea? So I'm gonna pull this aside. Out comes my glue stick. I'm gonna turn this over and glue on the back of it. All right, and I'm gonna remember, because I've got my example over here, exactly how it has to be glued. And you wanna get all the way to the edge with this glue. You know how this is, you go to school. I think it's really helpful when you're gluing to glue over here on the side of the paper or the area where you're working, so you don't get lots of glue residue, all right? Because you know this purple Elmer's glue is kind of funny. It can kind of come off on your pieces of paper. This part is fun, I love gluing. Okay, we have our 6. So you can already see how they're gonna sit on top of the black squares, which have been turned on their side, right? And I'm gonna put this in your view so you can see where we are, all right? Now what we have to do is we have to attach this one to the black ones, but we're gonna do it on an angle like this, okay? So let's get gluing. Now, one of the things that I think is helpful when we do a design like this is we lay down the big squares first, and then the very last section we'll be putting the black ones with the pink and the purple on top. So let's do that. And it's really nice if you can try to see how there's sort of the same space here as there is here, and same space here as there is there. We're centering these on our piece of paper, which is like the piece of fabric that I was talking to you about. So now we get to put the black ones on, and I'm excited about this. But before I start gluing, I really want to make sure that I've got the right placement. Okay, there goes the first one. And that's really going to help us. The placement of this first one is going to help us in getting all the other ones placed the exact right way. I think I'm going to move down the page. I wonder if quilters actually do this so they can get an idea of what their quilt is going to look like before they create it themselves. When you think about the way quilts look, there's many different pieces of fabric on them. Some of them have a very simple edge, whereas others might decide to embellish them a little bit more and add lots of different colors. And here we have it, our finished collage quilt. That was a lot of fun. And there's so many different shapes and sizes that you can choose from. There's so many different things that you can keep adding to it if you want to. In fact, lots of quilters will have different ideas about the shapes that they want for their quilt patterns, and they'll work those out for a long time before they actually make a decision. Like maybe you decide you want to do something like this 6 times on your next collage quilt. Or maybe you want to do something like this. Isn't that interesting? Huh, wonder what that looks like. Or maybe you just want to do something simple, but you want it to be all circles. Whatever you decide, it's going to be interesting because it's your eye and it's your imagination that has created your original collage quilt. We would love to see what you've created, and we're so happy that you joined us today. If you take a look below, you can see how you can send your own original collage quilt to the Castellani Art Museum, share it with us on social media, and we will share it with the world. Thanks. See you again.